In the dark of night, when the city is quiet and the sounds of cars become rare, I received a message about a delivery. Never knew that night would become my worst nightmare. The customer ordered food from a restaurant on the edge of the city, in an area where the light of the lanterns barely made its way through the thick fog. I felt a foreboding of something terrible fill me. Arriving at the place, I stopped in front of an old house that stood alone, surrounded by shadows. The windows looked empty, but I knew someone was waiting inside. My heart was pounding as I got out of the car, the cold wind rushing through me as if warning me of danger. The door of the house was open and music was playing inside. It was strange, there was no person in sight, but I heard a voice. "Come in. I've been waiting," they called from the darkness. I hesitated, but professional duty overcame fear. I took a step into the darkness. It was unnaturally dark inside, the light from my phone's flashlight barely made its way through the cracks in the walls. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck standing up. "I'm sorry I can't see you," I said, trying to stay calm. There was no answer. Only the dull echo of my voice seemed to be the only witness of my presence. I walked on, guessing which way to go, but my feet froze in place when I heard the soft laughter of a hunched figure in the corner of the room. Panic filled my mind. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the laughter continued. "Aren't you hungry?" asked the figure, moving away from the wall. It was a woman, her face was covered in shadow and her clothes appeared to be worn. She held out her hand to me and something was shining in her fingers. I took a step back, but she was already approaching. "Don't run. You will like it." She laughed, and this sound, terribly familiar, filled the space. A sense of danger swept over me like an icy wind. "It's just a delivery, I'm here to leave the food." I tried to calm things down. But her eyes lit up like a flame and a smile spread across her face. I realized that something was wrong here, but what exactly? Suddenly, the last light in the room went out, and I was left alone with the darkness. Everything around me seemed to be silent, only the sound of my breathing filled the space. I turned to leave, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind me. I started to panic, feeling my heart beat faster. My breathing quickened and I tried not to panic, but thoughts raced through my head. I knocked on the door, hoping someone would hear me and help. "Open it. I'm just delivering food." I called out, but my own panic only increased. I heard a soft whisper behind me. It was the woman who had appeared in the darkness earlier. "You're not leaving until you've tried what I made," she said, laughing. I could feel the terror rising inside me. She held out her hand again, holding an object that now looked like a knife. The heart was pounding in the chest, and the thought of escape appeared in the head. I turned around trying to find another way out, but the room was filled with shadows and I couldn't tell where the walls were and where the doors were. My body sank into fear again. I slowly turned back to the woman, hoping she hadn't yet realized how scared I was. But her smile became even wider. "Don't be afraid, I'm always here to help you," she said, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. At that moment, I noticed something strange. Other figures appeared from the shadows of the room. They were slowly approaching me, their faces were shadowed, and they were holding something that looked like a weapon in their hands. I understood that this was not just a delivery, it was a trap. "We just want to entertain you," commented one of the figures. That was all I needed to hear to start my escape. I turned and rushed to the door, but it was closed. Suddenly, the light in the room went out and I was left in complete darkness. I hit the wall trying to find a way out, but every move only made things worse. I could hear their voices laughing from behind me, as if I had become a part of their terrible game. "Where are you, kid?" the woman asked, her voice sounding like a dull echo. I could feel a cold sweat running down my back. I tried to concentrate, listening to the sounds to find a way out, but all I could hear was laughter. Finally I came across something, a door. They were heavy and old, but I pressed the handle with all my might. I could feel the energy leaving my body, but I had to try. The door opened and I found myself in a corridor that led deep into the house. I ran, not knowing where I was going. Every sound I heard seemed closer. I tried to focus, but panic flooded my mind. I heard footsteps coming closer and closer behind me. I turned to the side, looking for at least some possibility of escape. There were several doors in front of me, but they all looked the same. I grabbed one handle and opened it to reveal another room filled with old furniture and empty bottles. I didn't know if I should go in, but there was no time to think. I closed the door behind me. The room was filled with a heavy smell that made me suffocate. I turned on the flashlight of my phone, trying to find something to protect myself with. I began to look around and suddenly I came across an old kitchen knife. This could be my only hope. I held the knife in my hands ready to defend myself if they came. Outside I heard their voices discussing something. I did not know what to expect, whether this would be the end of my story or another attempt to survive. I stood on the edge of escape, knowing that this could be my last night in this horrible place. Anxiety crept over me as I began to listen for sounds from outside the door. The voices became clearer and I realized that they were planning something. "He can't escape so easily," said one of them, and another replied, "Give him a little time, he will surely come out." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest and knew I needed to stay quiet. I decided that if I left the room I would do it quietly, maybe find another exit or a hiding place. But where can I hide in this nightmarish place? I found a small hole in the floor, maybe it was an old cellar or storage room. I grabbed the knife and crept towards the opening, trying not to make a sound. Every sound of my movements seemed to echo in the silence like an explosion. I descended into the darkness, feeling the cold seep into my bones. I tried to focus on what was around. The basement looked old, with wooden beams and a damp floor. I stood for a while, listening to see if I heard anything from above, but it was quiet. Sensing that danger was still nearer, I decided to explore the basement. There was nothing but old boxes and dust, but among them I came across something strange, an old lantern. I tried to light it and was happy to see that it worked. Now that I had some light I began to explore the basement. The walls were covered with graffiti and on one of them I saw the words, "Don't trust the shadow." I felt a chill run down my spine, a reminder I didn't want to hear. Lantern in hand I walked on, but the basement seemed endless. I came across some old photos pinned to the wall. They depicted people who had apparently once lived here, but their faces were contorted as if they were experiencing something terrible. I felt my heart pounding again. Could these people be part of a terrible game? I started looking for a way out, but every step felt like a step into the abyss. Suddenly I heard someone rustling upstairs. My thoughts were racing and I knew it was time to go. I climbed back into the room, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. From above, voices could be heard discussing something. "Where is he? Why didn't he come out?" they asked each other. I could feel the fear come over me and I knew I couldn't just sit and wait. After getting out of the basement, I returned to the corridor. As I reached the door I heard laughter again. I felt the skin on the back of my head fall off again. Could they know I was here? I began to move silently, trying to avoid any sounds. I decided that the next step would be to check what was happening in the surrounding rooms. I carefully opened one of the doors and looked inside. There was an empty room with drawn curtains. I figured it might be a good place to hide if things went wrong. I quietly entered the room and closed the door behind me. The silence here was frightening, but it was better than being in plain sight. I could hear them still talking, but now they seemed a little further away. In the dark, I began to listen to their conversations. "He can't escape, we have to find him," they kept saying, and I realized that time was running out. I had to find a way out before they realized I was here. I cautiously approached the window to see if I could get out through it. The street was foggy, but I saw that there was no light. This could be my chance. I started to pull down the curtain, trying to be as quiet as possible. When I finally opened the window, I realized I could crawl outside. I climbed out, feeling the sweat running down my back. As I freed myself from the last part that was holding me back, I tried to start moving, but suddenly I heard a voice from within. "Where are you going?" My mind froze. I hid behind a tree, watching the figures leave the house. They were looking for me and I knew this was the moment to act. When they turned their backs, I decided to run, carrying with me the horror that had become part of my reality. I ran in the dark without looking back. Every sound made me stop, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I didn't know where I was going, but I could feel the adrenaline filling my body. I ran through the shadow-shrouded streets, trying to get to safety. It seemed that the whole world around me had fallen silent, and only I was running, trying to save myself. I could hear their voices receding, but the sense of danger remained. I remembered that I still had a few minutes left to find a safe haven. Not knowing where I was going, but my body was pulling me forward. I was left with a sense of presence. Was it just my fear or were they still following me? I tried not to look around, but in my heart I felt panic rising again. I finally came across a small shop that was still open at this late hour. I pushed myself inside, breathing heavily, trying to calm myself down. The seller, an older man, looked at me with concern. I tried to explain that I needed to hide, but he just shrugged and pointed to the back passage. I rushed there, hoping it would be a temporary shelter. I felt my heart beating in my chest and I thought that all this horror would end soon. But with each passing moment, the realization that they could find me only grew. I hid in a dark corner of the store watching the door. Time seemed to slow down. I heard someone trying to open the door but the salesman denied them. I felt like I was still in danger. The words of the woman from that terrible house came to mind again. "I'm always here to help." I got cold. I understood that I could not stay here for long. Maybe I can escape through the emergency exit. As I thought about my plan, I heard someone enter the store. It was them. I became quiet, trying to avoid detection. I could hear their voices growing closer and my heart pounded in unison with panic. Once again, realizing that time was running out, I decided that I could not stay in this trap. I headed for the emergency exit, trying to be as careful as possible. But as I tried to get out, I heard voices approaching. "He couldn't have run far," one of them said, and I felt a chill run through my body. My breathing quickened again, but I knew that if I didn't get out, this might be my last choice. I went outside, but now I knew I needed to find a shelter where I could remain undetected. Every step in the darkness seemed to lead me deeper and deeper into the abyss. I continued to run, passing dark streets and deserted squares. I had nowhere to go. I looked for any hint of a safe place where I could rest and collect my thoughts. By surprise, I came across an old park. The place was shrouded in shadow, but it was quiet. I hoped I could hide among the trees. I hid behind one of them, watching the darkness cover the surrounding streets. I sat down on the ground, trying to calm myself down. But it wasn't even a few minutes later that I heard footsteps approaching. They were looking for me and I felt terrified again. I looked around quickly, trying to find a way out, but all directions looked equally hopeless. When I heard voices approaching, I decided that I couldn't stay here. I moved to the second tree, trying not to attract attention. Their voices became clearer. "He might be around here somewhere," one of them said, and another replied, "We have to find him, he can't be alive." I held my breath, feeling my heart beat faster and faster. I decided to move on. While I was trying to get up, I suddenly heard the creak of an old branch. With a shudder, I realized that it might betray me. I stopped listening. They were approaching again. I started running again, trying to avoid the sounds, but my legs were already tired. I didn't know where to run until I saw a light in the distance. It could be a hope, an opportunity to escape from this terrible place. I started to run towards the light, feeling hope returning again. I realized that maybe this was a way out of my nightmare. But at the same moment, voices were heard from behind again. "He's going there," one of them shouted. I realized that my chances of escape were melting away. I raced toward the light, feeling a surge of hope. When I finally reached it, I discovered that it was an old gas station. The lights are bright and I saw several cars. I ran through the door, trying to find someone who could help. The salesman sitting at the table raised his head and his face changed from surprise to alarm. "What happened?" he asked. I started to explain, but suddenly they burst into the door. I felt the adrenaline fill my body again. Inside the gas station, I tried to find shelter, but I realized that the situation was getting complicated. The people who broke in looked fierce, ready to do anything to catch me. The seller tried to close the door, but their forces proved to be greater. "They will find you," he exclaimed, and I felt despair wash over me. I understood that I had to act. On one side there was a wall, on the other, where should I go if I don't find a way out? I grabbed the knife, knowing this might be my only chance. I walked slowly to the door, ready to fight. My heart was pounding as I realized there was nowhere else to run. When the door opened, I stopped and then started moving again. Suddenly I found myself surrounded. They were smiling as if they knew I wouldn't be able to escape. I realized that everything is being resolved now. At that moment, I felt fear grip my throat again. I stood still, knowing I had to fight, but how? I tried to strike, but there were many of them. My hope that I would be able to find a way to freedom became more and more illusory. They tried their best to grab me and I tried desperately to get out of their grasp. The whole scene turned into real chaos. I felt my strength leaving me, but my inner survival instinct did not allow me to give up. I grabbed the arm of one of them, jerking him away. Others were shocked, but not for long. I quickly realized that I needed to run while I still had a chance. Running out of the gas station, I headed back into the darkness of the night, not knowing where I was going. I could hear their screams behind me, but I couldn't bring myself to stop. I ran as fast as I could, trying to find my way to safety. The streets looked empty again, but the fear did not leave me. I ran until I came across an old park. The place looked abandoned, but I felt the urge to find shelter. I hid behind a tree trying to calm down. Thoughts that they might find me filled my head. I closed my eyes trying to focus, but the fear kept haunting me. Suddenly I noticed lights in the distance. Maybe it was a place to find help. I came out of cover and started moving towards the lights. Each step felt like the last, but I knew I couldn't stop. When I got closer, I saw that it was an old coffee shop. A warm light shone in the windows, and I hoped to find safety there. I went inside, hoping that I could rest here. The cafe looked cozy, but I didn't have time to enjoy it. I turned to the barista trying to explain the situation. She was startled, but then nodded, pointing to the back room. "Hide here," she said. I walked into the room and closed the door behind me, feeling my heart begin to beat faster again. I could hear the voices outside getting closer and closer, and I knew I was in danger again. I could only hope they wouldn't find me. In the room I tried to remain quiet, but fear felt like an integral part of my life. I heard the coffee shop door open, and then clear voices began to discuss where I could go. "He can't run far," I heard, and the sense of hopelessness grew in me again. I sat in the dark trying to find a way out, but there was none in the room. Time was running out and I felt like I was trapped. I listened as the voices got closer and closer, but suddenly I heard a crack. Someone tried to enter the room. I held my breath, realizing that everything depends on this moment. The door opened and I saw a figure enter. She was once again one of those who pursued me. I felt a chill run through my body as I realized that my chances of escape were melting away. I grabbed the knife, trying to be ready for any eventuality. As the figure moved closer, I braced myself for a fight. It seemed to me that this might be the last moment when I fight for my life. She suddenly stopped and looked at me with a smile. I realized that this is not just a stalker, this is another part of this terrible game. I didn't know what to do and I could feel the pressure building up. She was getting closer and I felt my heart pounding in my chest. "You can't run away," she said. I knew I had to act, but how? I wrestled with my thoughts, trying to find a way out. Suddenly I remembered the window I saw from outside. I quickly turned and ran to him. I couldn't give her a chance to catch me. I jumped out the window and flew outside, ready to continue on my way. When I went outside, I felt like I could breathe freely again. I ran without stopping until I came across an old factory. The place looked run down, but I had no choice. I went inside, hoping to find some sort of shelter here. The factory was dark and scary, but I couldn't let myself stop. I could hear their voices from outside, and they were getting closer and closer. Inside the factory, I came across a huge maze of rooms and corridors. I didn't know where to run, but I felt like I couldn't stay still. I started running, hoping to find a way out. My feet pounded on the concrete floor and I heard the sound of footsteps behind me again. I stopped, listening, and realized that I couldn't stay here much longer. They are already close. I decided to move on, trying to remember where I was going. Finding a small room, I closed the door, hoping they wouldn't find me. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to breathe as quietly as possible. I could hear voices getting closer and my heart pounded in my chest. I waited, not knowing what to do, until I heard a crash from outside. They're looking for me again. I listened as the door opened and two of them entered the room. I could feel the cold go through my body as they began to search. I could see their faces contorted with violent pleasure. I realized I couldn't afford to get caught. After getting out of the room, I tried to find another exit, but they were already close. I got into the corridor that led to the exit, but more of them appeared on the way. I felt the world spin around me and fear gripped me. My dream of escape began to crumble. As I ran in the opposite direction, I realized that this might be my last chance. I tried to breathe faster, hoping I could escape their capture. I didn't know where to run. Every step seemed to me the last. I could hear them laughing as they realized I was trapped. I felt my strength leaving me. When I found myself in another corridor, I realized that I had no idea where to go. I tried to think, but fear covered me. I was at a loss, and every thought I had of escape became more and more illusory. I heard their footsteps getting closer and realized that I could no longer run away. I tried to calm myself down, and one thought occurred to me: maybe if I distract them, I might still have a chance. I started banging on the walls to get their attention, and it worked. When they returned, I dashed down another corridor, trying to outrun them. I didn't know where I was going, but now I was fighting for my life. I rushed through the corridors of the factory, not knowing where I was running. My heart was beating so fast it felt like it was going to jump out of my chest. I heard the voices behind me begin to multiply, mixing with the sound of my footsteps. They won't stop until they find me. I came across a huge metal door that led to one of the production rooms. Could be my life or death. I opened the door, slipping inside, and immediately behind it I locked it. I looked around. The room was filled with old cars and spare parts. The smell of grease and rust filled the air. I could feel the fear taking root in me as there was no sign of a way out. A sound came from behind me that made me stop. I turned to see one of them walk into the room. I held my breath, hoping he wouldn't notice me in the dark. He looked around, but I remained quiet, trying not to move. Time seemed to stand still and I could feel cold sweat running down my face. I was on edge, not knowing if I would have the strength to survive. As he came closer, I saw his eyes flash with disgust. It was the same pursuer who was always one step ahead. I knew if he found me it would be the end. Suddenly I realized that I had to act. I grabbed a piece of metal that was lying on the floor and when he turned, I hit him on the head. He fell to the floor and I quickly jumped out of the room without looking back. I ran on, hoping that my actions did not attract the attention of others. My head was full of thoughts and I knew I couldn't stop. I need to find a way out. I ran through the corridors, but the more I ran, the more it seemed like a silly game. Again and again I ran into walls that seemed like an endless maze. I felt myself losing faith in my escape. Suddenly, I came across a huge gate that led to yet another production area. They were broken and metal fragments were lying around. I stepped over them and entered a new space. Everything in this room was fiery. I could feel the heat coming from the old furnaces that used to work. But I could not stop. This heat reminded me of the threat that was approaching. I spotted a huge pipe leading up and decided this might be my only chance. I began to climb it, hoping to escape my pursuers. When I finally reached the top of the pipe, I realized that my exit might be ahead. I jumped down onto a platform that was filled with old crates. After a few seconds of rest, I heard the voices again. This time they were even closer. I knew that time was short. I need to find a way out or I will end up in the hands of these monsters. I saw a door that led to the street and I rushed to it. But the moment I got closer, I heard their laughter. They knew where I was going and watched me like a trapped animal. I pushed the door handle but it wouldn't open. I panicked, trying to find a way to escape again, but it was too late. I heard their footsteps and that meant I had nowhere else to go. They appeared in the doorway looking at me with a cruel smile. I knew this was my last chance. I grabbed whatever I could find, a piece of glass, a metal pipe, and prepared for battle. I only had to fight for my life. I couldn't let them take me, I couldn't let them satisfy my horrible desires. They were getting closer and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I gathered all my strength, ready for the final battle. I tried to stay calm despite the panic. And when they rushed at me, I struck, hoping that I would be able to get out of this terrible situation. Will I be able to get out of this terrible nightmare? Will this be the end of my story? The moment they pounced on me, I felt adrenaline fill my body. I swung and the piece of metal I was holding hit one of them. He screamed, but that didn't stop the others. They continued to approach as if there were no rules in this grotesque game. I broke free from their embrace, but my fear grew stronger when I saw their faces contorted with hatred. I rushed to the side again, looking for any way to escape. I ran into a room with large windows that overlooked the dark streets. It was a lifesaver, I could see what was going on outside. I tried to open the window but it was locked. My hands were shaking and I knew I was trapped. Hearing them approaching, I ran to the wall where an old metal cabinet stood. I grabbed her and threw her to the floor, hoping it would delay them for a few minutes. I tried to open the window again, but its structure held fast. I could feel my hope melting away, but the will to survive remained in my heart. I looked around the room for another way out. In the corner I noticed a door that led to another part of the building. This was my only chance. I hurried to them, but the moment I touched the handle, I heard them reappear behind me. I had no choice. I went back to the window, gathered all my strength and hit the glass. It cracked and I quickly smashed it as I made my way through. I jumped out into the night, hoping the street lights wouldn't give me away. When I fell to the ground, I realized that I was being watched. I got to my feet and started running without looking back. The sky was dark, but my thoughts were occupied only with the thought of escape. I found myself on an empty street, but my body ached from the tension. I ran until I found myself in an abandoned parking lot. I hid behind the car trying to calm my breathing. I heard them go outside, laughing and commenting on their victory. It was disgusting. They were sure that I could no longer escape. I tried to think, but my head was filled with panic. Suddenly I heard the sound of a car approaching. I looked out from behind the car and saw an old truck driving slowly by. I shouted, waving my arms to get the driver's attention. The truck stopped and the driver got out after seeing my condition. I couldn't believe my luck. I rushed to him, explaining what had happened, and he immediately agreed to help me. We quickly got into the car and the driver pressed the gas pedal. I looked around, hoping those horrible people wouldn't follow us. The truck sped off into the night and I could feel the panic gradually leaving me. But I knew I couldn't relax. They could follow us. I turned my attention to the driver. His face did not inspire confidence, but now there was no other choice. As we drove past the houses, I began to feel safe. But the moment the driver turned to me, I saw in his eyes the same terrible expression that my pursuers had. "Did you think you would escape?" he said, watching me in the rearview mirror. I felt my fear reawaken. He was not what he seemed. My heart rate began to quicken again. I tried to escape from the truck, but the door was locked. I began to panic, realizing that I had fallen into an even bigger trap. The truck stopped and the driver, with a smile on his face, announced, "Time to play." I knew there was no chance of survival in this game. The truck door opened and I was back in the night terror. The choice between fight and flight became my last chance. I didn't know if I could survive, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to give up without a fight. I made a decision that I will fight until my last breath. My story does not end here. I looked at the driver, his smile was terrifying. He felt his power and I knew I had to act. Focusing, I began to look for a way out of this terrible situation. I felt the adrenaline fill me again. I grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. I decided to use my power instead. I tried to break the window, but the moment I hit, the driver just laughed. The truck suddenly moved and I felt myself thrown into the back seat. I knew I couldn't let him get the better of me. I hit the metal wall several times, but I kept fighting. It's now or never. I found a piece of glass that was left after my attempts to break the window. This could be my only chance. I prepared myself. The truck suddenly stopped. I looked out the window and saw that we were in an abandoned parking lot. There were no people anywhere. It looked like a trap. I knew I had to act fast. The driver got out of the car, ignoring the fact that I tried to follow him. The moment he turned around, I grabbed a piece of glass and aimed it at him. I hit him on the arm, causing him to drop the keys. He yelled and I took that moment to open the door. I got out of the truck and my heart was pounding like never before. I raced into the darkness, knowing I couldn't stop. I could hear him yelling at me, but I didn't stop, hoping I would find my way to freedom. I ran through the darkness, looking for any sign of civilization. I came across an old warehouse. It was quiet inside and I hoped I could hide there. I didn't have time to think, so I quickly went inside. But inside it was not as quiet as it seemed. I felt that someone else was here and my heart stopped again. I could feel them looking at me. I turned around and my eyes met the gaze of another man hiding in the shadows. There was no compassion in his eyes, only cruelty. "You shouldn't be here," he said quietly, but I knew this was only the beginning of my trouble. I had to act fast. I understood that a fight would break out between us. I grabbed a piece of metal that was lying on the floor and prepared to fight. He jumped towards me, but I managed to hit him in the face. I could feel the blood rushing to my ankles, but I had no time to stop. I had to leave this place. I found a door that led outside and stepped out into the fresh air. But I knew my pursuers were still behind me. I started running and hope appeared again. I could see a light in the distance. I started trying to get out of this horrible place and it seemed like my last hope. Every step I took brought me closer to salvation. When I finally reached the light, I felt my heart fill with joy. But the joy was short-lived. A loud buzzing sound was heard from behind. They were close again. I rushed forward, knowing that this might be the last battle for my life. I had to do everything possible to avoid their capture. I ran out onto the road and the moment I stopped, I saw my pursuer approaching. He was only a few steps behind. I managed to dodge his attack and felt him fall to the ground. I hit him again and he screamed. It was me and him, the last battle. I knew that in that moment I would either find freedom or remain in darkness forever. I struck again and in that moment all my fears vanished. I fell to my knees as I felt relief welling up. I survived. But I also knew that this horror would stay with me forever.